The one photography skill that every photographer should learn is how to shoot a portrait. If you own a camera, if you're into photography, at some point you will be asked to shoot a portrait of someone. If you have siblings or relatives with kids or kids of your own, at some point you'll be asked to photograph children. So in this episode, I want to share some great tips and tricks for getting shots that stand out in a crowd. Stay tuned. Hey gang, welcome to another episode of The Last Frame Live. First off, I'm excited to let you know that this episode of The Last Frame is sponsored by PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. You should know by now, PPA is a worldwide community of over 30,000 photographers that provides equipment insurance, education, and business tools made specifically for photographers. And the benefits have gotten even better recently. I have a link for you in the description so that you can check out all the awesome features for PPA members, and that link will save you $25 on a new membership. Check it out. All right, so gang, if you're here and you're watching live, thank you. Drop a little message in the chat. Let me know who you are and where you're watching from. It is always cool to see people tuning in from all over the place here. I've got Robert in New Jersey, Alvin in Virginia, Photograph Dieter is here from Germany. Awesome. Eric's here from down in Texas. We got people joining in from all over the place. So thank you, gang. Thanks for being part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune in to watch The Last Frame every week. And for that, I'm going to work really hard to help you with your photography in the next 60 minutes. And of course, it would help a lot more people find out about The Last Frame if you could do me a solid, hit that thumbs up below the video. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube will recommend the show to other photographers. And of course, while you're down there, feel free to hit that share button. Let your photography friends know that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. You can hit that button or share the link, lastframe.live. I'm going to put it right there in the chat for you. Twitter, Facebook, they're the fastest way to get the word out. And by the way, if you're a member of any photography groups or clubs or meetups, please let them know about The Last Frame. Don't keep it all to yourself, right? So real quick, I just wanted to say, you might notice a couple of things are different tonight. I tweaked my back this week. That's why I'm not standing. That's why I've got a different microphone because the other microphone's too far away. That's why the opening was a little different. That's my excuse. It's the only one I got, but I'm going to do the best to make this work for you. And also, two last things. Make sure you check out the Talk Chat Photography podcast. If you're not listening to these podcasts, sincerely, you're missing out on some great information. Tomorrow, I'm going to be posting an awesome interview with Jack Hollingsworth. And believe me, you're in for a treat. If you've never heard of Jack Hollingsworth, you're missing out. There's so much that I could tell you about Jack, but I don't want to spoil a great interview. So let me just leave you with this little teaser. Jack is a professional travel, lifestyle, and portrait photographer with over 40 years of professional experience. And he currently shoots exclusively with iPhones. That's right, iPhones. And his work, it's awesome. Last week, I had a great conversation with Canadian photographer Eric Sadie. Eric is a fellow Tether Tools pro, and he shoots commercial fitness and lifestyle, as well as celebrity and portrait images. He also struggles with ADHD, which is something that many young photographers are dealing with today. Eric is very open and transparent about dealing with the condition and how it impacts his business. You can check out the podcast at talkchat.com or on any of the platforms that serve podcasts. Just go ahead and search for TalkChat. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop that link in the chat for you too, so that you have it. I've really been very fortunate. In case you're new to the Talk Chat Photography podcast, I have interviewed folks like Lindsay Adler, photography icons, David Hume Kennerly, who was the chief White House photographer for President Gerald R. Ford, David Burnett. I've interviewed brand ambassadors like Scott Robert Lim, Will Cadena, Miguel Giles, and honestly, loads of others. But here's the thing. Be careful. If you listen, you will learn things. So don't say that I didn't warn you, right? So before we get into photographing kids, I got one other piece of business here, actually two other pieces of business. So sorry, that I want to touch base on really, really quick. And by the way, for some of you that are kind of on the fence, I know there's a few people. In fact, I totally expected we're going to have a light audience tonight because it's like, I don't photograph kids. Kids are boring. I stay away from that. I've already heard a whole bunch of, reasons today why people aren't into kids. Aside from being really short-sighted thinking, I assure you, you're going to walk away with some tips tonight that have nothing to do with photographing kids, because there are techniques that help you photograph kids that can be used in many other scenarios, and that's what we're going to get into. But before we do that, I mentioned at the top of the show that our sponsor this week is PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. So as part of an annual PPA membership, and this is just amazing, honestly, you're able to activate the Photo Care Equipment Insurance. That gives you up to $15,000 of coverage, all paid for by PPA. So that alone is worth the cost of membership. And if you already have coverage under your homeowners or some other type of policy, this policy works as a secondary, or what they call an excess policy, to the other insurance policies that you may already have. But if you don't have another policy, it acts as your primary policy when you file a claim for up to $15,000. But here's the cool part, and I know a lot of you have heard me talk about PPA and the insurance before. PPA has just announced that they've upped the insurance benefit. Now you have full replacement value of stolen or damaged equipment with just a $350 flat deductible. Think that through. Equipment repairs covered with a $50 flat deductible. And if need be, you can purchase additional coverage. They'll cover up to $100,000 worth of gear. So as I mentioned, in my opinion alone, the insurance alone is worth the cost of the membership. But that's not the only protection that PPA provides. Their indemnification trust, you should read about it on the website, but honestly, it can be a lifesaver for any photographer that's trying to make money. Sometimes things go wrong, even for the best photographers. Memory cards fail, shots are missed. Clients are just difficult, and they decide that it's your fault that the clouds block the sunset on their special day. Trust me, that stuff happens. Regardless of the reason, unsatisfied clients making demands or threatening lawsuits, you don't want to go there. It's no fun. I could go on about PPA for a while, you know that. But in fact, I've previously done an entire video on the benefits of PPA. There is a link to the video and a link to save you $25 in the show notes below. And then one last thing, I swear, this is the last thing. Tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. in the United States. In fact, let me bring that up on the screen so that I can share that with you. Go to a browser here and get my website. If you visit my website and click on live presentations, tomorrow night is one of my most requested presentations that I do. It's called Shoot Prep, the photographer's guide to setting up a successful shoot. And I am dropping the link in here so that you have it. This is an online presentation. It's done via Zoom. It's live. It's interactive. And I share with you my entire prep process for my portrait and my fashion portrait sessions. Emphasis on people photography, meaning portraits, working with models, but we also cover prep for even landscapes and lots of other things. We begin with how I come up with my ideas and how the whole thing progresses through finding models, working with makeup artists, deciding on backgrounds for a photo shoot, all of it. Attendees also receive downloads that include my shoot prep documents, the ones that I share with my subjects in advance of a shoot, as well as some email templates and even model release templates. You'll learn things like, obviously, the importance of preparing for a shoot, how to generate ideas for creative images, best ways to find models and makeup artists, collaboration tips for working with models and makeup artists, steps to ensure that your model doesn't flake. So many of you complain about models flaking. I have never had a model flake. And when a model does flake, I hate to tell you, gang, it's your fault, not theirs. The cost to attend this presentation is just $20. If you're a member of my mentoring group, you get a discount. And as I mentioned, this is the last time that I'm going to be presenting this talk live online. So this is it. This is your last opportunity. It's a talk that I am normally being paid quite a bit of money to do in person at conventions and trade shows and things like that. So this is your last chance to get the information cheap and to be able to ask me questions live and in real time while I'm reviewing it. Okay, so our topic tonight, photographing kids, right? Now, I completely get it when we talk about photographing kids that for some of you, that's kind of just like a complete and utter nightmare. I understand. Certainly for me, I'll be really honest, I've spent most of my career trying to avoid having to photograph kids, especially kids' portraits, right? Um, part of the reason why I'm not a fan of kids' portraits, here, I'm going to share with you a portrait of my two grandsons, okay? Just so you get a sense. This about sums up the way so many photographers feel about shooting images of kids, okay? So what I want to share with you tonight is not really a whole lot about working in the studio. I'm gonna share a couple studio tips because, as you can see, this set of shots didn't work out really well, okay? But I will tell you this image and a bunch of other images pretty much just like it. These were crucial to getting the images that I wanted out of this shoot. But we're going to talk kind of kids in general, and I'm going to deal a lot with on-location shooting, natural light, and action, the kinds of action and activities that kids do. I want to talk to you a little bit about the psychology. You guys know that I am all about the psychology. The more that you understand about the psychology that goes into interacting with people, directing people, just engaging with people, and even portraying people in photograph, the stronger you can make your images. Plus, it makes your job easier. That's a big part of why it's so important. And I also want to take advantage of this to show you some techniques that I use. And when I say techniques, how I handle exposure, how I handle autofocus, how I handle actually shooting and composing, because I actually do use a little bit of auto frequently when I am shooting the kids in natural settings. And we're even going to talk a little bit about sports, and I'm going to give you a couple sports tips that you'll be able to take away, and you can use these tips literally for any sport that you're going to photograph. They'll help you out, okay? So a couple of things with kids before we start going through pictures and all that. And what I'm going to show you tonight, pretty much, this is both of my grandkids. The younger one is Harvey. The older one, that's Joey. 99.9% of the images you're going to see tonight are of Joey because I've got a wider range of him since he's older. He's going to turn 7 in a couple of months. And so I want to be able to kind of walk you through photographing young kids from kind of the time that they're infants up through basically almost 7 years old, to talk to you about some of the things that you'll encounter and some of the thought processes and tricks that can be helpful. So I'll save Harvey for another talk or another topic because I'm really just in the process of starting to accumulate a lot of images of Harvey. So first of all, there are no rules, right? Hopefully that goes without saying. There are no rules. So I find it one of the hardest things for photographers that want to take pictures of kids today, especially if they are kids of siblings, kids of other relatives, kids of your own. There are no rules, and you have to let go of epic apathy. If you haven't heard me talk about epic apathy before, epic apathy is the overwhelming need caused by fear that your image has to be epic. And if you cannot meet that standard, you tend to not take the pictures. That's epic apathy. I want credit for that in the medical books. But seriously, I can't tell you how many photographers do it. I'm guilty of it sometimes. It's hard to get past that. In today's social media world, let's face it, we all do that gut check before we stick the picture up on Instagram or before we put it on Flickr or we put it on Facebook. It's like, is this as good as I can get it? Is it good enough? Is it going to get a lot of likes? To use Miguel Giles's phrase, will it be a scroll stopper? But we're talking about kids. And we're talking about images that are of kids that you probably know. And by the way, as long as we have time tonight, I will take these images that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can turn these kinds of images, which were taken as a grandfather, but how you could turn these kinds of images into a money-making element. Actually, really, really easy. So anyway, number one, don't worry about the image being epic. Number two, remember your why. Why are you taking the picture? Is it to remember a moment? Is it simply because this is your child or your grandkid or sibling's kid? And is that what's important? And if it is, it doesn't have to be the most amazing picture that you took. It doesn't have to have zero noise or grain. It doesn't have to be tack sharp. It doesn't have to have creamy, soft, luscious bokeh in the background. It has to capture that moment and the emotional attachment that you have to that moment. Now, certainly, if you're photographing someone else's kid and you're doing that as a job and it's a task, then indeed it's a little bit more challenging because you do have to hold yourself to some slightly higher standards, right? It's kind of like when you shoot a portrait of somebody. Nobody wants a picture of what they really look like. They want to see an image of themselves on their best day times 10, right? That's what we want in a picture. So that's actually kind of how I approach most of my images of my grandkids. I look at it from the standpoint of I know their parents are going to love the pictures no matter how good the pictures are. Believe me, I've got lots of iPhone images that I've taken just in a pinch. And my son and my daughter-in-law, they think they're some of the most amazing pictures ever. I will tell you, ironically, my favorite picture that was ever taken of my grandson, I didn't take it. It was taken by a woman at his daycare when he was 2 or maybe 3 years old, and they had spaghetti and meatballs for lunch. And he literally has just spaghetti sauce and a little bit of spaghetti and ground beef all over his face. And he's got this dead stare into the camera like somebody just beat him up. To this day, I love that picture. I didn't get to take that picture. So the point is, it's about that emotion, right? But here's the client that I create in my mind when I photograph my grandson. So if I'm going out to one of his little league games, if I'm photographing him at karate, if I'm photographing him in the backyard doing whatever, I actually make him my client. But not him now at almost 7 years old. Him in 20 years when he's 27. When he's 27 and he can't remember most of these events that are taking place. You know, he'll know that he played Little League, but he's not going to remember game by game. So I take advantage of this opportunity to make sure that these images create the most incredible version of his childhood that could possibly be imagined. That's the approach that I take. So if he's playing a sport, I'm going to shoot it as if I was shooting a major league sport. I'm going to use long lenses. I am going to make sure that I understand the sport that he's participating in. I am going to anticipate the action. I am going to do all the things that a Sports Illustrated sports photographer would do to get great pictures. And I'm going to work with long lenses. If he is just having fun and goofing around, I am going to do my best to make sure that my backgrounds are clean. And they can't always be, and that's okay. But I'm going to do my best to make sure that my backgrounds are clean, that it isolates him, and it looks like he is having fun and having the time of his life. So that 20 years from now, when he looks back at these pictures of himself, it seems like a magical time. So that's the client that I create for myself when I photograph my own grandkids. And then If I'm photographing kids for someone else, in other words, not my kids, I will tell them, I make it clear to them, this is the way that I like to photograph kids. If somebody came to me and asked me to do a portrait of a kid like this one, that you're seeing on the screen now, these kind of portraits aren't my thing. In fact, you can see when I've done portraits of my grandkids, like there's another one, right? They love them. They'll have fun with them. You can just imagine 20 years from now, the older brother to the younger brother, this picture's gold, right? So those are the fun ones for me. I'm not into doing the studio portraits. I'll do them every so often. My daughter-in-law, she'll kind of, nudge me to do some studio portraits, and I'll talk about kind of what I do and how I go about doing it. But you can tell mostly I let them have fun, period. And I'm going to photograph what happens, and we'll take it from there, right? But when we're out and about, it's all about them. It's all about their memories and building on it. So I want to start here actually with 3 images that are here. And I thought I saved a few more. And you know what? I did here. I'm sorry. Let me go to the no ratings and oops, let's turn off all those. Yeah, here's the set. So I wanted to show you this set of images for a couple of reasons. Number one, these are the first images that I ever took with an Olympus camera. This was a rental, right? It had the 12-40 2.8 Pro zoom on it. That's what I rented it with from lensrentals.com. Okay. And this was just at a relative's house. They have a huge backyard. It was during a big family get-together picnic. I hadn't seen him in, I think, about 2 weeks. And so when he arrived, I wanted to do some photographs of him. And of course, I wanted to test out the camera, right? So since this was the first time I was playing with the camera, I had loaded up a little bit of extra gear that day. And I had a speed light with a MagMod mag bounce on it, which are the rubbery silicone things, right? So I certainly didn't need it outside. It was really overcast and kind of cloudy. I didn't really need it outside, but I thought, well, if I take any pictures in the house, I'm going to want a little bit of light because I knew it would be dark. So when we went outside, I didn't originally have it on the camera, but I thought, you know what? I might be able to have some fun with this because if it got kicked around or moved around a little bit, I could wash it off. It wasn't going to hurt it, right? So I decided to kind of make a game of tag, and you'll notice the sticks that he's picking up. It's the mag bounce on top of the camera that he's trying to hit. And I am shooting with the camera set up so that I've got the LCD screen out. And not shooting, I shouldn't say out. It's more like either, flat on the back, or occasionally if I was shooting low, I had it set up out to the side. But I'm basically working with the eye tracking autofocus, and I am composing on the fly, which is not a way that I like to shoot ideally. Cameras are designed to have your eye at the viewfinder, but sometimes that's the great thing about having these little flippy screens is you can get really interesting angles without looking through it. And I'm not directing him at all. I'm not going to give him any directions. He understands, even at, this, I think this was like 2.5, 3 years old. He understands I'm taking his picture, but he's interested in getting the white thing that is flexible. So I'm literally running backwards most of the time, and he's chasing me. And if you look close, even like this image here, I love that image. It's soft. Oh my God. It's soft. But guess what? The world doesn't end. My son actually loves this image. It's a great shot as far as I'm concerned. Is this going to win some technical award in a photo competition? Of course not, right? Period. But that doesn't matter. So, I'm basically chasing him around. Notice I even started to go with some slow shutter speeds so that I got a little bit of movement. As I moved on with my shooting, and I know like, okay, I've got some cute shots. Then I went ahead and I dropped down to a slower shutter speed just to get a little bit of motion blur from time to time. This little set right here, where I'm looking down at him, kind of turned out to be, whoops, there we go. Kind of turned out to be kind of one of my favorites because with the ground, I got a very, kind of clean background. But again, it's just a kid having fun. And as we go through them, some of the backgrounds are really clean. Some of the backgrounds, like, with the house and the car in the background, not that great. The picture would have been here. Where's the other one that had the car? There we go. Like that. Not a great background. But in terms of just a fun picture of the kid, yeah, cool. So, there's a difference here in the sense of some of these pictures are pictures that could be maybe used professionally. Some are pictures that are just for fun. But remember, if the client happens to be, the parents and they want fun, playful pictures of the kid, even a picture like this, they're going to be thrilled with. So one of the things I want to point out to you now that I'm starting here, you'll notice now that, my grandson at this point, he's into being a toddler. I am almost always giving him things to do and getting him to do things. He learned very early on, probably by age 3.5, that he calls me Joe Pop, that Joe Pop takes lots of pictures. And he also learned to simply look at me straight up and it's like, Joe Pop, put the camera down. It's time to play. So I can never let the camera get in the way of what I'm doing with him. So if I want to photograph him doing things, it's a little different now, like with Little League or that. He's in a game. It's a team sport. That's fine. But anyway, if it's anything interactive, if I want to photograph him doing it, I got to find a way to make a game out of it. That's the kid thing. But I want you to notice another thing that I do with these pictures. Aside from the ones, whoops, I just lost my spot there. Aside from the ones where I am looking down at him like these, I try to keep very low camera angles. Right? I have very few images that are taken at my eye level where I'm just staring down and making him smaller and minimizing him. When you're going to photograph little kids, don't shoot down on them unless you're doing it for effect. Okay? So if you're doing it for effect, I mean, there are times where, I've done kind of interesting compositions where I'll like shoot straight down at him or things like that. Sure, go for it. And there are times where I very intentionally wanted to make him look really, really small. Okay. But otherwise, shoot on their level. And that is probably the greatest thing about having the flip out LCD screens. Is that you are able to hold the camera low. You don't actually have to get on your stomach. Because, of course, the challenge is with getting on your stomach with kids. If they're running and you're on your stomach, you can't keep up with them. It actually makes you immobile, right? If they're, kind of very stationary where they're at, then it's absolutely fine and it's easier to work with. So the flip out screens are very, very helpful that way. But there's another thing that I want you to see. And I want you all to hold yourself accountable to this as a standard. Because again, I'm not showing you any images tonight that are amazing. I'm showing you real, everyday, just fun pictures and giving you some tips along the way. So let's be clear, right? But here's the standard I want you to hold yourself accountable to. I can't tell you how many times I review images from people in my Facebook group or people in my mentoring group, or just people that have hired me to do a portfolio review for them, or who are doing a consultation with me and they're having some struggles, so they're sharing images from a shoot. I can't tell you how often I look through someone's shoot, studio or location, it doesn't matter. And image after images, the exposures are all over the place, like literally all over the place, underexposed, overexposed, all over the place. Now, I got to give you a little bit of tough love here, gang. Most of you, not all of you, I understand, but most of you are now mirrorless shooters. So for you DSLR shooters, you have a little bit of an excuse, but it's an excuse, meaning it's not acceptable. It doesn't get you off the hook. Back in the DSLR only days before mirrorless, we all had to work around this problem. But with mirrorless, you have no excuse. And the reason for that is with mirrorless, you're using an EVF. electronic viewfinder, meaning when you are looking through your viewfinder or looking at the LCD on the back of your screen in real time, you are seeing the finished exposure. So if it's dark, it's dark. If it's overexposed, it's overexposed. There is no excuse for your exposures to be fluctuating all over the place when you're shooting a series of pictures like I've just shown you. And again, this was the first time that I used the Olympus camera. So if you look close, those exposures, they're not perfectly even across the board, but they're doggone close, right? So to me, the biggest benefit to mirrorless technology, literally the biggest benefit, it's the what you see is what you get, the EVF. You're seeing it. So the challenge becomes, here you have a kid, and pay close attention. Some of these shots, I have a darker background, which what's the camera going to want to do? It's going to want to overexpose his face. Other shots, I have a much brighter background. What's the camera going to want to do? It's going to want to underexpose his face because of all that bright, cloudy sky. So the fact of the matter is, even though these are so even, I'm manipulating the exposure nonstop. And as you can see, I'm not saying to him, all right, wait, stay right there, making an adjustment, doing a test shot. No. So yes, I'm shooting on auto, but what I'm shooting is I'm shooting auto ISO. So I select, and probably 90% of the time when I'm photographing kids outdoors, I will shoot auto ISO. I will pick my shutter speed based upon the activity that they're doing. If they're going to be very stationary, I can go with a slower shutter speed. And that allows me to keep my ISO down. And that also allows me to shoot at a wider aperture if I want. If they are moving around a lot, then I need a faster shutter speed. How much faster? That depends on the activity. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute because I'm going to show you some baseball images and show you that even with sports, I will allow for a certain amount of blur in certain elements of the image. I'll show you that in a second. But I'm going to select, the first thing I'm going to select in my exposure array is my shutter speed. And then for aperture, it's going to depend on the practical application of what are they doing, how random is it, will the camera be able to manage the autofocus? Now, the great thing about Olympus eye tracking autofocus, it rarely misses. And the same is becoming, the story for Sony and all the other companies. The eye tracking autofocus is getting much, much, much better, but it still misses sometimes. So understand, since that's kind of an auto feature, you have to be willing to assume the risk that every now and then you're going to get a slightly soft image, right? Doing this kind of stuff, it's not a big deal if it happens. If you're doing client work, that becomes a problem. So you have to be aware of how well is the camera tracking. The nice part is, at least with Olympus, it gives me a visual confirmation as I'm shooting. So that's very, very helpful. If your camera has that, turn that on. But what I'm doing then, and every one of you can do this or something very similar to it if you're shooting mirrorless. I've got auto ISO set on the camera. I'm selecting the shutter speed. I'm selecting the aperture. And usually when I'm shooting the kids, my aperture is wide open. But let me explain. My favorite lenses for shooting my grandkids, just so you understand what wide open means. This is my current go-to favorite lens. This is the 12 to 45 f2.8, or excuse me, f4. Sorry, f4 zoom. So 12 to 45 for you full frame folks, that's a 24 to 90 millimeter, right? So it's a wide angle, pretty wide angle to a short telephoto, f4. More than adequate for indoor lighting, outdoor lighting, the whole bit. I'm not afraid to let my ISO go up a little bit. And then when I'm outdoors and I'm shooting sports, my new go-to lens is this monster here. This is the 100 to 400, 5.6 to 6.3, or excuse me, 5.0 to 6.3 lens. So it's a variable aperture lens, which I'm ultimately not a huge fan. I'm holding the Olympus camera. I'm sponsored by Olympus. This is an amazing lens, but let me be clear. I'm ultimately not a fan of variable aperture lenses, but it was the difference of spending less than $2,000 or spending just over $7,000 for the new white one that you've seen, the 150 to 400, which is a fixed aperture. I'm not going to use a lens this long, that makes it justifiable for me. And you don't necessarily have to have a lens that's a 100 to 400 because there are some other issues that come up when you're using a lens this long. You have to handle a lens like this properly if you're going to hand hold it. And I do hand hold it. I don't use a tripod. I don't use a monopod. You can do great images like the ones I'm going to show you with a 70 to 200 if you're a full frame shooter, or a 40 to 150 if you're an Olympus Micro Four Thirds shooter. The shorter lenses, again, you can still do amazing imagery with, right? But those are the two ranges that I work with in lenses. But understand, in a situation like these images, this very first set that I'm showing you, the camera is going to be sending the exposure all over the place because the camera doesn't understand what to do with those extreme variations where we're going from really bright background to really dark background in seconds, right? So what I do is I set a custom setting so that in the case of, now this is the EM1 Mark III, so this is a little different than the way I had the EM1 Mark II set up. That was the first Olympus camera that I tried. But for this camera, what I do, I have my back ISO button, okay, which is a shortcut button. With the Olympus cameras, you can reprogram pretty much any dial or any button that's on here. I have that set up so that when I press that down, my front dial, which would normally be my aperture, my front dial becomes my exposure compensation, plus or minus exposure. So all I have to do to make the adjustment is press that button and adjust. To the left for less light, to the right for more light. Done. Simple. And so on the fly, it's a very easy task, especially like for those of you that are all about back button focus and that kind of stuff. If you can do back button focus, you can do a technique like this, where you're pressing a button, spinning the dial, and you're doing it in real time. You're just watching. It's getting dark, adjust it. It's getting light, adjust it, right? So part of the reason why I'm showing you this, and I'm really spending so much time on this exposure thing, is it is a problem. It is a problem when you are not getting consistently good exposures, because you're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on really, really expensive sensors and camera gear. And then you're basically abusing the system by being 2 stops underexposed or a stop and a half overexposed and saying, well, yeah, there's enough dynamic range that I can pull it out in post. You're pulling it out in post, especially when you're underexposing. You're pulling it out in post with a sacrifice in quality, period. And please don't ask me about the whole ETTR, ETTL thing. If you don't know what that is, congratulations. Trust me, stay that way. Ignorance is bliss in this particular subject. It's ridiculous. There are some circumstances where that philosophy works. But when people preach it like, oh yeah, I always ETTR or I always ETTL, that's a bunch of BS, gang. Because that is going to lead to some really poor quality images compared to what your camera is capable of doing. Bottom line with photography, you should all know by now, right? There is no one size fits all camera, no one size fits all lens, no one size fits all set of settings, no one size fits all technique, period. There just isn't. So I want to fast forward a little bit with him, and we'll do some baseball stuff here. Well, actually, since I have these here, let me just do these really quick. Another way to get great pictures of little kids that indeed, tend to, there's a camera, And by the way, when my grandson was about 4.5, someone at his school taught him cheese. I literally was ready to drive to the school and strangle the person because it took me best part of 1.5 years to get him to stop going cheese when I would pick up the, like I literally would just pick up the camera and cheese. Now if I tell him to smile, he's still gonna give me a big cheese, but at least he doesn't do it automatically. He's so accustomed to me having a camera in my hand at this point, he just ignores it and ignores me taking pictures, which is awesome. Okay. But this is just a quick set. Nothing special about this set of pictures that I'm about to show you. Nothing special at all. We were at a TGI Fridays. Literally, that's all. And he was particularly active and being very funny and animated. And I thought, I want to do some pictures of him. I hadn't seen him in a while. I wanted to do some shots, but I wasn't going to make a big production out of it, especially not in a restaurant, not the right place, etc. So I happened to have the 45 millimeter f1.2 on my camera at the time. And I just set it on the table right in front of me with the screen flipped out so that I could see. And I just left it there for most of the meal. In fact, I even set my plate next to it and took my food from there so that I could just keep watching him and his reactions. And you can see we're inside, super shallow. I'm shooting wide open. These are probably like at f1.2. In this case in particular, only one eye is in focus. Oh my God. Yeah, if we were in the studio, somebody should say it. If we were in the studio, Joe, and it was a portrait, you'd be like, both eyes need to be in focus. You're right, I would. But remember the why. And by no means are you going to see me posting this, on Instagram like I think it's a scroll stopping image, right? It is okay to take pictures that aren't scroll stoppers. It is okay to take pictures that are not Instagram worthy. It is okay to take pictures that won't win an award. If they make you feel good, damn it, shoot. And do it by the thousands. Really, you should. But this is just a matter of, watching his expressions and shooting, and along the way, having some fun. Frames are always a lot of fun. Basically I started lining up things between him and me and kind of trying to catch him between, a cup and a water bottle. Just to make things interesting. He had a hat. So, I had either my son or my daughter-in-law, pull the hat on him. And again, it's just what's also nice about this. You notice shots like this, he's actually talking to me. The camera's sitting on the table. I've got it lined up. So I'm interacting with him and I'm getting expressions out of him and getting him to think about things and do things. And I'm able to get all of these different shots. It makes things a little bit more interesting. You have probably seen these images on the Olympus website if you've been to the Learning Center for Olympus. This was a series that I did for an article about photographing kids outside in the summertime. So I will add the link to that to the show notes. But this was just my son on a slip and slide. It's the first time he had ever, or my grandson, first time he had ever been on a slip and slide. So I decided I wanted to do kind of a little bit of a story. So I wanted a range of pictures. I shot this series of pictures with the 7-14. For you full frame shooters, that's a 14-24. It's a 2.8. And then also the 40-150, 2.8 zoom, which that would be a 90-300. And don't ask me why. I'm just being honest. I took a few with the 300 millimeter. Why did I take the 300 millimeter when I had the 40-150? I don't know, but I did. So it was there and I switched. And really immediately after I switched, it was one of those moments of like, wow, Joe, that made a big difference. Now you're on a prime and you can't, adjust for anything. And it's the same focal length you were just working at, right? So anyway, all that being said, I wanted shots that were establishing shots. So I made sure to find an angle that had a clean background, right? All, green, the one building in the back, but, no long chairs, no people in the background, nothing kind of sticking out, being obnoxious. I did long telephoto shots where I let everything go blurry except for him. I did shots where I used a really fast shutter speed and focused on just the water drops, right? And left him kind of a little bit out of focus in the background, right? I did not quite as long shots, getting expressions, even getting some of the accidents and wipeouts. But again, the elements that are here are the elements that make up good photography. It's got nothing to do with a kid, right? The best part of it is this is the first time this kid's, been on a slip and slide. So the hard work's done for you, right? He's going to have fun no matter what. Your task is kind of get out of the way and photograph what's coming. So then it comes back to the basics of photography at that point, right? You are going to look for clean backgrounds. You're going to decide how much depth of field you want. You're going to make sure that you're using shutter speeds that are fast enough to stop the action that you're shooting. And at that point, you are going to anticipate things that are going to happen, but you are going to be ready pretty much for anything. One of the nice things about working with the Olympus camera is I literally was able to hold the camera in the water stream to get this shot and get really, really close and do the wide angle. I've had somebody ask me, fair question, well, Joe, what about the fact that the horizon line's crooked in this shot? I am not going to try and sound like a genius and tell you that I intentionally made the horizon line crooked. I did not. I was on my knees, trying not to get too soaked, but I was getting wet because literally the camera was under the water because I can do that with my Olympus cameras. And I was looking through the LCD, and this is a great example of why you should not shoot looking through and looking at the LCD unless you have to. It is always better to have your eye at the camera. I know there are YouTubers that are much more popular than me, but the key word there is they're YouTubers. They're not professional photographers paying their bills by shooting images. They're YouTubers. And they walk around, with their camera out here all the time, like, oh yeah, or they'll hold it like this. That's not how the cameras were designed, gang. Read your damn manual, right? How do they get great pictures? I never said you can't get great pictures that way. But the fact of the matter is, you are setting yourself up to miss a lot of details and to get a lot of things sloppy. So take that for what it's worth. But in this case, the background, literally, the crooked background literally does not bother me because what it's actually giving me, it's giving me a second set of diagonals between the water slide, the crooked, horizon, and him leaning and everything. And it's a great example of, hey, if you're going to tilt the camera, right? If that horizon line was just off a smidge, technical term there, measurement, smidge, then yes, it would drive me nuts. But the fact that it's really crooked and I have the other leading lines, for me, it works great, okay? And fortunately, Olympus thought so too, because they've actually used this image in several marketing campaigns, email marketing campaigns, the website, all that kind of stuff. So, and by the way, notice with these images, gang, look at the lighting scenario here, right? He's side lit. Notice, though, that the shadow side of his face is not black. So there's a couple things going on here, right? If you notice really close, and you should be able to see this even on YouTube, the shadow side of his face, so that's the camera left side, gang, right? It's a little bit cold in color, meaning it's a little bit blue. Why is it a little bit blue? Because of the blue slip and slide. It's kicking light back up. So it was actually a natural reflector. The first couple times that he went down the slide, he was on the red side. He just happened to pick the red side. I noticed it in one of the very first frames that I shot when I previewed it, when he was running back up to the top. I noticed that I was getting a lot of red, and I knew that was going to be really hard to adjust. So at that point, I realized, okay, it's going to be a lot easier to make some adjustments with the blue. And even if it does go a little bit colder on the left side of his face, it's the shadow side, which is usually a little bit more blue and a little colder. So I just told him, hey, come down this side. And then I even set my camera up there. So this was one of the first shots that I did after I got him to switch sides, because then he was also going to slide down towards me and towards my camera, right? But again, from the standpoint of exposure, nothing's blown out, nothing's blocked up in the subject. So this is proper exposure. And let me be clear, the camera didn't tell me what the proper exposure is, right? So I don't mean like I lined up the needle. No, I used my eyes and I adjusted for every step of the way. But I want you to notice the parts of his body that are lit by sun are not blown out. The parts of his body that are in shadow are not blocked up. It takes some practice, gang. Right? You don't just get to the point where you instinctively pay attention to that by picking up your camera once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or by watching 4 YouTube videos and then going and shooting something. That's not how it works. You shoot and you shoot and you shoot. But you have to start with working really, really hard when the camera is in your hands at developing those habits of paying attention to those details. And it's not something you pay attention to the detail once and set your exposure and then you're good to go no matter what the kid does. You have to keep watching that because the lighting scenarios change. He changes his positioning, the sun's moving, maybe there's clouds coming by on a partly cloudy day. You decide to change your camera angle, all of those things. It's a non-stop watching for those details. And some of you may be wondering, like, do you do like really long bursts at high frame rates, all that kind of stuff, Joe? No, for these shots, I did have the camera set on the high speed burst, but I do them very, very short. I am still kind of old school in the sense that if I'm photographing action, I watch for the moment, and I will shoot a burst frequently, but I won't do spray and pray where I'm going to run off 20, 30, 40 frames. My bursts are like 5 frames, 6 frames. That's all I'm getting out of those bursts. So I'm counting on the idea that the first frame I shoot is the one that I want. Every now and then, it's not, and it's going to be the second or third frame in that burst. But I am not just doing spray and pray. And here's the thing. The technology that we have available to us, because there's two sides to this spray and pray argument. For those of you that are newer to photography, you will find many photographers in my shoes, meaning my age and my years of experience, will pretty much kind of like talk down to you with the no spray and pray. That's not building skills. You got to be able to do it in one frame, all this kind of stuff. And if we're being real, don't tell the old guys. But if we're being real, it's just because they're jealous because that's how they had to learn it. So there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of the fast frame rates and the ability to load up a bunch of frames. However, here's the key. I'm going to say to you, you need to be in the middle. Spray and pray sucks. Spray and pray doesn't guarantee you that you get the shot. Spray and pray is just what it says. Spray off 20, 30 shots and hope like hell that you got something good in the middle. There's no consistency to that. You're not building any kind of a skill set. You're not building any consistency to your work and to your abilities. So it's actually not helping you. Every now and then you may get something amazing. But for the most part, you're not. So the challenge is, here comes that P word, practice. Find some stuff to practice so that you do it just in one frame. And for a while, no high speed. Shoot, single frame. One frame each time you go to shoot. And that's going to show you very quickly how good you are, how bad you are. And it's okay if you're bad when you start. Seriously, again, this is why it's practice. And your goal is to keep working better at getting good at one frame. The better you can get at one frame, when you switch over to shoot a 10-frame burst, you are going to have much better pictures, more amazing pictures, more consistently. I promise you that. I've told the story before. I'll share it again, and I have a feeling we're going to take kids into next week too, maybe, because I'm not going to get through everything I wanted to share with you guys tonight. But when I was a teenager, I got my first Nikon F when I was 15 years old, and about 6 months later, I got my first 200 millimeter lens, which that was a long lens for me, even though the lens was like actually really short and thin. But that was my first sports lens, and I idolized a photographer by the name of Neil Leifer, who was not a lot older than me, but was already shooting for Sports Illustrated and shooting covers in every major sporting event in the Olympics. He took some of the most iconic images of of Muhammad Ali. So I was really wanting to learn sports photography, and I was ready to practice. So literally what I would do at this point, I had a darkroom in my house. I would go to school. When I came home, I lived on a small residential street that attached to a busier street that a block away attached to an even busier street. So I would come home, I would go into my darkroom, I would take out my bulk film loader, and I would load a 36 exposure roll of Tri-X film. ASA, not ISO, ASA 400. I would put that roll of film in the camera, and I would walk down to the corner of my street, and I would sit on the curb. So this is the semi-busy street. And I would look down towards the really busy street, which was maybe 200 yards away, and I would watch for a car to come around the corner. And this was at a time period where there was no such thing as autofocus. In fact, zoom lenses were just starting to hit the market, and they sucked, period. So I had a 200 millimeter prime lens. As a car would turn the corner, my self-challenge was keep the front left bumper, because back then cars had big silver bumpers. Keep the front left bumper in focus as that car drives towards me, passes me, and then drives away from me. I would do this for 10 or 15 cars. Didn't take that long. The road was busy enough. After that, I would say, okay, next car. And when the next car came, I actually started shooting. And what I would do is I would shoot a full 36 exposure roll of black and white film from the time the car came around the corner to the time the car got out of sight going past me. Yes, by the way, I had a motor drive, okay, on a Nikon F, all bought used. So I would then, and now you can all know how much of a nerd I was, I would go back home to my darkroom. I would develop the roll of film. I never printed these rolls of film, never even made contact sheets of them. But I had a clipboard hanging on the wall in my darkroom with a piece of paper that was graph paper, and I had made a chart. And so each day, I would write in on the chart the number of sharp frames that I got out of 36. So again, the front left-hand corner of the bumper, that's the part of the bumper that would be closest to me as the car passes, right? Making nowadays, police would be called on you. They very possibly might nowadays. But I would literally track how I was improving and if I was getting better. So, all this practice stuff that I push on you guys to do, I'm not saying you need to be quite as obsessive and OCD as I was as a kid, but that's how you get better. It just is. And yeah, the cameras are so much better now, and the cameras do so much more of the heavy lifting for us, which, look, I'm not one of those guys that's like, oh, it was so much better then. Oh, hell no. I think the technology we have is incredible. But the fact of the matter is, even with all this technology, you're still going to get better pictures if you develop a skill set to go with it. You just do, period. So there's no way around that, gang. If you want to get good at it, you got to put in the effort, because there's no amount of gear that you can buy, and there's no gear available on the market that is going to foolproof what you do and create amazing images. It's going to create amazing images for the skill level that you have and the amount of work that you're willing to put into it. And that's where it stops, right? Cameras can't take it any further. You've got to do the heavy lifting. So let me just start on the baseball stuff, because that was the next stuff that I wanted to get into. And I'm actually going to jump ahead. I will show you this. These pictures here, this first set, these were from him playing Little League 2 years ago. So last year he didn't play because of the pandemic. So this was 2 years ago. It was his first time playing Little League. He was the smallest kid on the team by a mile. And this was T-ball. But I want you to notice, again, these are all situations with extreme lighting situations. But what I did is I went out with the idea, and I didn't have this long lens at the time. So the longest lens I had was a 300 millimeter, right? So 600 millimeter full frame equivalent. That's what I was shooting these long shots with. And I went in with the idea, I want to try and make this little kid who's, like 4+ years old, I want to make him look like, he's a pro. So I shot him like a pro. I always made sure that my camera height was below his eye level so that I'm looking slightly up at him, right? The ball sits on a stand, on a tee, so there's no pitch coming in, but I wanted some motion. Now, if you've ever seen, a 4 or 5-year-old swing a bat at a ball on a tee, it ain't happening very fast. There's not really a lot of motion. So I'm actually shooting these at relatively slow shutter speed, like a 2/50th of a second, to ensure that I get some blur off the bat and the ball coming off the bat off of the tee, right? And so the goal was, again, get low, shoot into him, even, when he's running, anticipate. If he's on second base, I'm standing on the sidelines at third base. And here's a cool tip, by the way, gang, for a lot of youth sports. If you have little kids, get on the field. Be respectful. Don't get in the way. Don't get on the field and talk to the kids and that kind of stuff. But now that he's, 2 years older, he's playing what they call machine pitch. And here, I'll get down to some of the shots that I've done like very recently. So now when they're hitting, the ball is pitched out of like a little mechanical machine. So these shots that you're seeing here, I took these shots from center field, but for those of you that understand a baseball diamond, I'm standing on the grass right at the back of the infield. And this is a little league field, which means it's smaller than like a major league baseball field. In other words, with this 100 to 400 millimeter lens, it gets me right in on the action. Okay. But the best part of it is at that spot, I'm behind all the kids because they don't need outfielders at that age. So when I walk out on the field, I don't talk to the kids. All the kids on my grandson's team, they're all used to me now. They know who I am. They know why I'm there. They know that I take pictures. They ignore me. because I've been at multiple games. But even in the very first game, I didn't talk to them. I didn't interact with them. I just kept the camera up in my eye. And if they started talking to me, I would pretend I didn't hear them when I picked the camera up because I didn't want to take their attention away from the game. But what I'm doing is I'm looking to be able to get shots of the kids' faces. It's almost always about faces. I have some nice shots of my grandson that I like that don't have faces, but you're going for the faces. That's where the action is, right? And one of the things, by the way, if you ever get a chance to photograph little kids this age, playing baseball, is they always close their eyes when they swing the bat or when the ball's coming in. So it's great. So this actually was from a very recent game. It was like a week ago. This was my grandson's first time catching behind the plate. His father, my son, was a catcher all through high school and little league. So he wants to be a catcher. And this was his first time. So I definitely wanted to shoot from, center field, looking in and being able to get shots. But what I want you to notice, like about this shot here in particular, just to bring that point up again, and I see your question, Em. I'm going to answer that in just a second. What I want you to notice, look at the lighting situation here. So this is a morning game. This game started at 9 in the morning. This shot's probably done at about 9:15 a.m. Sun's still fairly low in the sky. It's off to the left. And you'll notice, like, on either kid, whether it's my grandson or where it's the other kid, part of the kid's in the sun, part of the kid's in the shade, the ball's in the shade, there's sunlit grass. And I want you to notice that nothing's blown out. There's no detail lost. That's perfect exposure. No ETTR, no ETTL. And by the way, you see that nice green backdrop, that padded backdrop? All the camera wants to do is overexpose the kids because of that green backdrop. And by the way, that's not an Olympus problem. That's a digital camera light meter problem, period. That's what a light meter is going to do. It's going to overexpose the kids. So you're not using your light meter for this. You're working with the EVF, which is what's so great about having an EVF. But you have to pay attention, right? And even when, the sun is behind a cloud and it's all shadowy, same situation. The meter sees that dark background. This was on a different field, a different day. The meter sees that dark background. It's going to want to overexpose the kid, period. So, you're working with what you're seeing in the EVF. Shot like this, it's completely backlit. But I know that some light's going to kick up off the grass. And by the way, shots like this one, this is important to show you. Shots like the one that you see on the screen now, shots like, let's see, let me find another one. I'll go back a year. This will be better. Well, even these. So like this bottom picture, that's maybe not the best one. Let's go back to last year. Here's a great set. Okay, if my grandson's watching, he's going to be mad at me for saying this. But these shots here, he looks like, at like, 4.5 or so, he looks like a pro about to pick up this ball. I promise you he did not catch the ball, right? So one of the things that I do, and then we're going to wrap it up tonight, and I'll pick this up again next week because there's more technique, and I want to get into M. So for M, I'm going to give you part of the answer tonight, but I'll tell you more next week, and I can actually show you a visual example. When I go to these games, because I'm surprised nobody's asked, it's like, well, if you're going to like little league games with these kids, aren't the other parents worried about where you're taking pictures for and all this and that? Literally the very first game that I went to for my grandson this year, and I did it last year, I introduced myself to the parents that were there. In fact, this year, one mother came up to me like 2 minutes after I was there because she thought I was with the local newspaper because of the gear that I had. She, thought I looked like I was with the paper. So she came up, trying to figure out where she should look for pictures that maybe her kid would be. And I explained to her, it's like, no, I'm actually just here to photograph my grandson. And I told her at that point, I said, I promise you, I'll be at most of the games, not all, but most of the games during the season, and I will take pictures of all the kids and I will share them. So at every game, I don't just shoot my grandson. I shoot every kid because it's great practice. Shooting every kid actually makes me better at shooting my grandson. And so, all these other parents who are not photographers and that, they're getting pictures of their kids where, their kids look like they're, kind of some superstar or almost, superstar at the plate, that kind of stuff. They're thrilled that they're going to get these pictures. And all I'm doing with the pictures is I am putting them in a Dropbox folder, sharing it with my son, and then letting him take care of sharing it to, the other parents. And they can do with them what they want. I don't care, if they have them printed, they can do whatever they want. But parents think it's great. So the parents, when I show up, parents are thrilled that I show up, right? And I have had some shots that I've done in the past. Thank you so much, Monolith, for the super chat. I appreciate it. Thank you. There are parents that I photographed kids in the past where I've reached out to them and said, hey, listen, I'd like to be able to use this image for, social media or even, teaching a class or that type of stuff. And because I gave them copies, they're thrilled. Sign a release. Let me have the image. Really, really easy. Okay. So really quick, I want to, just in case you need to use this information in the next week, Monolith, I want to give you a start on this. But next week, I can show you actually a really visual example. So the question here is, the biggest problem when following running kids is the focus. Can you explain the focus techniques that you're using? So I'll tell you the focus techniques that I'm using, and you're probably going to be really frustrated because I have a feeling your camera may not do it. So here's what I want to know next week, Em, because I'm running out of time now. I'm already 6 minutes over. I'm sorry, but here's what I want to know for next week. When you show up next week, remind me about this question, and I need to know what camera brand and what model you're using, and also what lens. But for me, all I have to do is put my Olympus cameras, on continuous autofocus. And keep in mind, these are like 7-year-olds. So even when they're running towards me, I've got quite a bit of range before they're going to basically get ahead of the camera's ability to focus. So all I do is, let's say that my grandson is running from third base to second base, and I'm standing, on the side of the field at third base. I said that backwards, didn't I? Second base to third base. If I'm standing on the side of the field at third base, as he's running, I'm watching through the EVF. When he starts getting soft, I will just simply release the shutter button for a second, press it down again, and start shooting. Because when I release it and press it down, it grabs focus on him again, and it'll keep up with him for a little bit. If we were talking about doing that with like a pro baseball player, that's a different set of techniques that you're going to want to use. So for next week, if you can provide me with camera brand and the model number and the lenses that you use, and also what sport, I will give you some very specific tips for that scenario, because unfortunately, different scenarios are going to work for different things. I'm sorry to say, the autofocus on the Olympus cameras is awesome. I mean, Sony here, you read about Sony having amazing autofocus of the last probably 2 years now. And indeed, and much of the technology they're using, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from Sony, but much of that technology first came to market in Olympus cameras, right? So Olympus doesn't quite get the credit for it, especially since the company was just sold and all that. But the Olympus autofocus is amazing. And especially if you're really diehard into sports and birding and things like that, when you get into EM1X, you've got the AI capabilities for birds and trains and airplanes and automobiles. And that's expanding as well, which just makes the autofocus like insanely fast and accurate. And I'm always, when I'm shooting kids like this, I'm always using the eye tracking autofocus. Always. I keep my focus grid fairly large, not the whole frame. I keep it fairly large, and I still move it around. In other words, I try to anticipate the action. So my focus grid doesn't stay in the middle of the frame all the time. If my grandson's batting, just like in this shot here or any of the others where he's batting, I'm going to have the focus grid. Actually, this is a good example. I'm going to have the focus grid over to the left side of the frame, right? So I'm going to move that grid according to what I'm shooting. So I will definitely help you out with more detail next week. Daniela, thank you so much for the very kind words. I appreciate it. So as always, this went a lot longer than I thought it would, but I got a lot more that I want to share with you. And again, as hopefully you're figuring out, quite a few of these techniques you can take away and use them for adults and other things, okay? But please, the one thing for now is I'm really challenging you guys. Just be honest with yourselves. Go back and look through some of your shoots. If your exposures are all over the place, light, dark, underexposed, overexposed, gang, that's a problem. That is a big problem that says that you are not paying attention to the important stuff, right? Nobody said this photography stuff was easy. And the fact of the matter is the cameras do make it a whole lot easier than it used to be, but still requires some practice, right? So for tonight, gang, we'll pick this up next week, I promise. That about wraps it up for tonight. Again, special thanks to PPA, the Professional Photographers of America, for sponsoring tonight's episode. And remember, in the show notes, there's a special link that will get you $25 off of a new subscription, or excuse me, a new membership And I'm not kidding. Even if it's just for the equipment insurance alone, it's totally worth it. But check it out. There's tons of other benefits. And in the meanwhile, gang, remember, if you really want to improve your photography, I think I said it probably 7 or 8 times tonight, go pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Stay safe. Hope to see you next week. Take care.